Welcome everyone to Thread of Knowledge, the Intricacies of Hawaiian Textiles. Thank you for joining us tonight. Please note that there is closed captioning in English available by clicking on the CC button at the bottom of your screen. I'm Mathilde Walker-Bio. I'm the curator of programs at the American Folk Art Museum. Tonight, I'm joining you from Queens, New York, and I want to acknowledge that the museum stands upon Lenape Hawking, the unceded traditional homeland of the Lenawe Delaware peoples. We honor Lenape people, past, present, and future, and are committed to centering Indigenous perspectives in exhibitions and programs at the museum. As many of you know, the American Folk Art Museum is dedicated to uplifting the work of self-taught and folk artists across time and place. And we are thrilled to celebrate both historical and contemporary works of quilters and textile artists across the United States with one of our current exhibitions, What That Quilt Knows About Me, now on view at the museum until October 29, 2023. Drawing from the museum's collection of textiles, this new exhibition features a wide range of quilts and related works of art spanning the 19th through 21st centuries. In this exhibition, quilts take on the role of history keeper. Curator Emily Jevalt and Shade Ayorunde appreciate quilts beyond their visual beauty and or utilitarian function to consider them as objects of cultural and political significance, holding poignant and sometimes hidden information about their makers, their communities, their times and places. So this program is organized in conjunction with this exhibition, and it's a second segment of a series of conversation called Threads of Knowledge. In this series, we will expand on the idea that quilts and textile works carry powerful meanings and can be understood as tactile archives. Unconventional but eloquent traces of the past, singular but radical records of the present and of the future. So we'll explore the special ways in which quilting, sewing, stitching, weaving, and knitting contribute to the production and transmission of knowledge across generations and geographies. So starting point for this program is a piece from our collection titled Kuʻu Hae Aloha, My Beloved Flag in Hawaiian. It's a 19th century Hawaiian flag quilt that carries political meaning in opposition to the United States' illegal overthrow in 1893. This work is currently on view at the museum as part of the exhibition What That Quilt Knows About Me, and it's part of a section, the personal and the political. In this section, we have quilts whose textiles and styles reflect global histories of conflict of the 18th and 19th centuries. While these objects preserve regional, cultural, and ethnic traditions, they also materialize a complex system of material exchange, as well as stories of oppression, protest, and resistance. And so today I'm very pleased to be joined by Drew Kawaina-Broderick, a friend and a colleague from the field of education and art curation. So hi, Drew. And
hey,
maybe
Mathilde.
you would like to say a few words about you before I just say a few more notes about the structure of the program.
Sure, it's good to be here with everyone. Aloha, my name is Drew Kawaina-Broderick, as Mathilde said. I'm an artist, a curator, and an educator. I grew up in a small peninsula called Mokapu on the windward side of the island of Oahu, currently occupied by the U.S. military. And today I'll be helping to moderate the conversation. Good to be here with you all now.
So yes, so Drew will be our host tonight, and you will be in conversation with our three guests who also are here, Emily Cornish, Bernice Akamine, and Jory Minaya. So Bernice is here, I think. Hi, Bernice, and hi, Jory and Emily. So we're really thrilled to bring this amazing group of artists and thinkers together to the space of the museum and to connect their practices and researches to the exhibition What That Quilt Knows About Me. So this evening, I just wanted to add that My Beloved Flag, this piece on view in the show, will serve as a general framework to think more broadly about the aesthetics and the politics of Hawaiian textiles, as we are officially celebrating the Pacific as part of the Asian American and Pacific Islander Heritage Month. We are excited to dedicate this program to Hawaii's culture and history. And just a quick note on the structure of the program. So Drew will start with a short introduction, and then we will hear from our three speakers. After this presentation, everyone will be in conversation for about 30 minutes. There will be time for questions, so please share your questions in the Q&A feature. I will try to get as many as possible. I will be also using the chat room to share more details about the program and the speakers. This program is being recorded and will be made available online in the coming weeks. And I would like to thank Richard Ho, who is behind the scene, our IT director, who's always there helping out. So thank you, Richard, for your technical support. And I would like to thank everyone here for being with us. We're really grateful for this opportunity to connect online, and that will not be possible without your support. And I hope you will consider supporting our programs through donation after this conversation. Your support has great impact and makes a difference in our ability to champion the work of artists. So thank you. And now I'll turn it over to Drew. Thank you, and thank you, Drew, and take it away.
Can we advance to the next slide, please, Richard? Thank you. Aloha kākou, warmth to all in attendance. As Matilda is saying, it's great to have this opportunity to gather online with everyone now for the program Threads of Knowledge, the Intricacies of Hawaiian Textiles. I also just wanted to thank the three panelists, art historian Emily Cornish, Kanako Iwi artist, cultural practitioner, and activist Bernice Akamine, and Dominican United Statesian multidisciplinary artist Joydi Minaya for the work that you all do and for your willingness to be here now with us all and to share a bit about that work. I'll let you folks introduce yourselves further during your individual presentations. But before we get there, I just wanted to provide some kind of points of departure for everyone that's in attendance. And Richard, we can go to the next slide, please. So as Matilda was saying, we're departing from two works today. The first is a Hawaiian flag quilt, the one that you see now, attributed to Mary Sherman Thompson from the late 19th century. And this is currently on view at the museum. The second work that we're going to be considering is another work from the museum's collection, but it's not currently on view at the moment. And that's a Hawaiian style quilt by Mary Kay Burkowski from 1979. Next slide, please, Richard. So I suppose over the course of the conversation, we'll return to these two quilts and to their imagery as a way of connecting the different practices of Joydi and Bernice, and also Emily's ongoing research. So with the title of the exhibition in mind, beyond what these quilts might know about their respective makers, these quilts might also know that in 1843, the sovereignty of the Kingdom of Hawaii was internationally recognized. These quilts might also know that in 1893, the Kingdom of Hawaii was illegally overthrown by white settler businessmen backed by US Marines. These quilts might know that in 1895, Queen Liliuokalani was arrested and imprisoned following an unsuccessful counter-revolution by Hawaiian royalists. These quilts might know that in 1898, Hawaii was annexed to the United States through the Newlands Resolution, that is without a treaty and in spite of widespread opposition embodied in the Ku'e anti-annexation petitions. And maybe most importantly to me, these quilts might know that over the course of the 20th century, the United States attempted to erase our Native Hawaiian language, cultural practices, and spiritual beliefs. And, you know, I think the things that we know change with time. And so the final comment I might offer about what these quilts might know now is that despite the best efforts of the US, our Kanako Iwi autonomy persists. We can go to the next slide, Richard. So, preconceived fantasies aside, Hawaii is not a paradise. It's not a wasteland. It's not a backlot. Hawaii has its own stories that continuously challenge the imposed aesthetics of military fatigues, tropical print shirts, and beach towels. Many artists, myself included, of the Pacific, as well as those of the Caribbean, are actively engaging these entwined military and tourism industries through their practices. A bit of background on this idea of militarism. We can go to the next slide, Richard. Militarism, as Teresia Tewa, beloved poet, scholar, activist, and mentor defined it, is, quote, a phenomenon by which military or paramilitary force ensures the smooth running of a tourist industry. And that same tourist industry masks the military force behind it. Teresia Tewa goes on to state that although military forces and tourism provide employment and social mobility for many islanders, they also drain or pollute natural resources, endanger sacred sites, and introduce unhealthy convenience goods. Next slide, please. Flags. We're speaking about flags a lot today, so a few thoughts on flags. As potent symbols of people and country, flags signal the hopes and horrors of every nation. Here we see the flag of the United States of America above the flag of Hawaii, above the McDonald's Corporation flag, with threads that can be unraveled all the way back to Kamehameha Ekahi, Kamehameha the Great, conqueror of the independent islands of Hawaii, Oahu, Maui, Molokai, and Lanai, as well as the founder of the Kingdom of Hawaii. The current official flag of the 50th state of the United States of America has been raised up over the Hawaiian Islands, unchanged in design since 1898. Next slide, please, Richard. Over the next hour or so, we'll hear from Emily about Queen Liliuokalani, the Queen's quilt, and its relationship to flag quilting practices and the politics of late 19th century Hawaii. Building on this historical context, Bernice will then share a bit about handmade kapa, or Hawaiian bark cloth, and her ongoing series of kapa moe, of bark cloth bed covers that reference and reinterpret 3 quilts of Hawaii. And then to help us sort of bring the complex lived realities of Hawaii into a larger discourse of tropicality, imperialism, extraction, and appropriation, Joydy will speak about her 2018 series, I Can Wear Tropical Print Now, which offers commentary from my perspective on the unsettling connection between violence and leisure. Following these individual presentations, and before opening up to questions, comments, criticisms, reflections from those in attendance, Emily, Bernice, Joydy, and I will chat about the importance of creative practices that simultaneously affirm lesser known stories while also resisting dominant narratives. Hopefully we'll also have a chance to speak about the possibilities of hybridity, of engaging with different materials and practices and histories, as well as the way in which cloth allows for layered and contextually dependent meanings to be communicated by makers on a deeply personal level. Appreciate you all listening to these brief introductory remarks. I'll stop here and turn it over to Emily, who will share a bit about Queen Liliuokalani and the Queen's quilt. Thanks, Emily.
Yeah, excuse me. Thank you, Drew, and thank you, Mathilde, for inviting me to partake in this talk. I really appreciate being able to share this space with all of you. A little about me, I'm a doctoral candidate at the University of Michigan. My research predominantly focuses on Royal Hawaiian women's engagement with 19th century photographic technologies, but related to that, I do often look at other types of materiality and visual culture that they used. Let's see, so I was born and raised mostly in Western New York, but currently I reside in Salt Lake City, which as at present is home to, I believe, 8 distinct tribal nations, but it is also the ancestral homelands of the Paiute, the Ute, and the Shoshone. So with that, I'm gonna just dive right in. As Drew stated before, we're looking at Queen Liliuokalani and the quilt that she made. This quilt was produced in response to the 1895 counter-revolution that's sometimes referred to as the 1895 Wilcox Rebellion. And so, Richard, can we go to the next slide? In response to this conflict, Queen Liliuokalani was arrested on January 16th, 1895, and she was imprisoned at Iolani Palace, where she remained until September of that year. There's a lot that takes place in the intervening time, including she undergoes a military tribunal, and she's also forced to abdicate her throne and any future claims to the throne. So some other conditions of this imprisonment, Liliuokalani was not allowed visitors other than Evelyn Townsend Wilson, sometimes called Kitty Wilson, who was her lady in waiting. And she was also deprived of newspapers or other materials that would have kind of connected her to people and events outside the palace. So one of the things that happens is Queen Liliuokalani turns to music and the fiber arts, including crochet and quilting, to pass the time, and also provide a chronicle of these events from her perspective. And Richard, can we move to the next slide? Thank you. So Liliuokalani and Kitty Wilson, along with many other women from her social circle, begin making this quilt while she's imprisoned in the palace. And the 9 panels collectively record the queen's life, her rule, her overthrow, along with a lot of other significant information about the women involved in making the quilt, especially Kitty Wilson and her family. We can certainly think about this quilt as an assertion of Liliuokalani's political legitimacy, and I think also in a form that, for the time, her captors would have found non-threatening or not obvious. And this also places the quilt within a longer continuum of such objects, quilts, other forms of textiles, which I think Joy will get into a little bit, that are used as alternative forms of critiquing and combating militaristic regimes. Finally, just a little more history related to the quilt and also Liliuokalani and just kind of textiles in general. This wasn't the first time that Liliuokalani used fiber arts as what was then a contemporary expression of Hawaiian culture, and also as a means of responding to settler colonial forces within the kingdom and abroad. Okay, so we can go to the next slide from there. So for the sake of time, I'm really going to focus mostly on this central panel of the quilt and also on Hawaiian flags and flag quilting in general. And just really briefly, the panel here is divided into 4 squares. So we've got the 2 of blue silk, and then we have the 2 made of red shattered silk, which I actually think is a really interesting choice materially. And then these squares are divided by cream-colored bands of cloth, which meet at the central motif of the Hawaiian coat of arms. Some other distinctive features, you also have patterns that are reminiscent of those found in Hawaiian kapa or bark cloth. And these are used as decorative borders in this panel, but also the quilt as a whole. And so one thing that I think the text of this quilt does is very much make this an object that is both text and textile. And we see this with starting with the left panel, so of blue silk, and we can move to the next slide. So starting with the left blue silk panel, this one details the queen's birth, her transition from heir apparent to queen, and then there's also a crown which is surrounded by a maile wreath. The next 2 squares, which are both of the red silk, talk about her dethronement, imprisonment, and the beginnings of making the quilt. And then the text concludes on the bottom right by providing details about her abdication, including the date and then everybody who bore witness to that. So the writing here functions as a recounting of some genealogically significant events in Liliuokalani's life, certainly not all. And it's delivered in an object which is, quilts are kind of more associated with Europe and the United States, I would say, and kind of popular imagination. But what it's doing is kind of thoroughly Hawaiian in its historical practice. Some other things I find interesting here have to do with the text in the red squares. I noticed that these primarily concern actions that are perpetrated against the Queen in Hawaii, and that despite the Queen being dethroned, her status as monarch is maintained throughout. So, and this is usually done through the use of the title Her Majesty. We also see this honorific is stitched into the bottom blue square, in which Liliuokalani, in big scare quotes, abdicates her throne. And I think one way of reading this is that not only is the quilt suggesting the injustice of what was done to her and to Hawaii, but I think it's also pointing to the provisional government's inability to sort of actually take that title and status away from her. So the last thing I just want to say is that the bottom blue square draws attention to the quilt's making and emphasizes its creation as a collective activity. And so it kind of indicates the labor of the Queen, but also the other women who contributed to this object, and very much is highlighting reciprocal relationships and community collaboration as key to anti-colonial action. And so from there, we're kind of move to the next slide and talk a bit more about flag quilts in general. So the Hawaiian flag is presented in groups of 2 at the 4 corners of this central panel of the Queen's quilt. And I think there's a way where you can think about this quilt as combining applique flag quilting from Hawaii with the patchwork style. I think this is supported to the degree that the applique flag style typically adheres to a format of 4 large flags, which form a border around the royal coat of arms. And you can see this with the quilt on the left that's included in the exhibition. And so this basic composition is maintained to a degree in the Queen's quilt. It's just that the flags and the coat of arms don't dominate the quilt anymore. Some things to note about flag quilts in general. When they initially hit the scene in Hawaii in the 19th century, these were used to do things like acknowledge important relationships, individual contributions to the kingdom, and also as affirmations of one's loyalty. And in the immediate aftermath of the overthrow, we do see these meanings start to shift. So they kind of become more objects of protest, and we'll see things like families loyal to the monarchy using the quilts as canopies for beds. So again, a way that's kind of subtly able to indicate that protest and also their loyalty to the kingdom. And can we move to the next slide? So just to wrap things up, regarding the flag within the Queen's quilt, we do also see the strategic use of text and imagery. In this case, I think to indicate distress, and this is regarding the lower right panel of the quilt. And so in this, the flag appears inverted along with the words Kuʻu Hae Aloha, often translated to my beloved flag. So in addition to ku'u being able to translate to the term my, it also is used to translate to, or has connotations of, to lower or to let down or discharge. And so I think that there's potentially an interesting play in words there, or a couple of meanings that can be gleaned from that. And so the final thing I'll say before handing things off to Bernice is that Queen Liliuokalani was not the only political figure at this time who was cognizant of the power of the Hawaiian flag and its imagery. We see the provisional government, followed by the US government, seek to repurpose the Hawaiian flag in service of their agenda. I think from the perspective that the flag of a sovereign kingdom is now widely recognizable as that of a US state flag, does suggest that at various points in time that this was successfully done. But be that as it may, the meaning and the use of the Hawaiian flag remains very potent and unstable. And Julia Brian Wilson, who maybe some of you were able to see the talk with her related to this exhibition, notes that it's exactly this instability and kind of easy quality of transformation that makes textiles so powerful in what they can do and become. And so I think I'll leave things there and hand it off to Bernice. Thank you.
Thank you, Emily, and thank you, Drew, Matilda. Aloha, my name is Bernice. Sorry, okay, I'm gonna start again. Aloha mai kako, greetings, everyone. Can you hear me? Can you all hear me okay? Okay. My name is Bernice Akamine, and I live in the rainforest in Volcano, in the district of Puna on Hawaii Island. And that is the rainforest across the street. I am an artist of Native Hawaiian descent with family connections to Hawaii Island that go back long before recorded history of these islands. For this series of work that I will be presenting, I'm using kapa, Hawaiian bark cloth. Living in the rainforest with its constant rain and cooler temperatures slows the fermentation and drying of my kapa and slows my output, connecting my practice with the natural world, as has always been done. Luckily, I wrote things down. Kapa is made using, oh, sorry, next slide. Thank you. Kapa is made using the inner bast or phloem of the wauke or other Hawaiian plants. So on the left, you can see a wauke plant. This one's a poa'aha, a native variety, and it's the same plant as the paper mulberry that is used for kozo in Japanese paper making. And if you look at the center top image, you can see after it's been cut down, you slit the bark in the center lengthwise. And then top right photo, you can see the inner bast and peeling the bark off of the stalk itself. The bottom right photo shows the bast on the bottom with the bark on, and the bast on the top when the bark is removed, which is what we would use. And the center image on the bottom is of Wesen beating kapa fresh. He's using a hohoa, a first beater, and a kua, the anvil beneath. And Hawaiians traditionally did beat fresh wauke, but they primarily fermented. Because if you fermented your kapa or your wauke, you would get much thinner and finer kapa. Next. Okay, so the image on the left is Kuʻu Hae Aloha, My Beloved Flag, from 1895 on the island of Maui. This kapa was given as a wedding gift to Maud Mansfield Baldwin and Joseph Platt Cook V on July 18th, 1895, on the day of their wedding. Traditionally, a quilt was given to a child upon marriage. The central motif of the Kuʻu Hae Aloha is an interpretation of Kalakaʻa's coat of arms without the second crown, but with the Medal of Order of Kamehameha awarded for service to the kingdom. And you can see that on the bottom, hanging down right below the coat of arms. There are symbols of the ancient ali'i, the chiefly class, in the center shield. The flags going around the quilt each have 8 stripes, representing the Hawaiian Islands. In 1816, Kamehameha I designed a flag that could have either 7 or 9 stripes. And in December 1845, the Hawaiian flag was switched to 8 stripes when the island of Kauai joined the kingdom. The Hae Hawaii served as the flag of the kingdom, and after the overthrow of the Hawaiian monarchy, the provisional government chose to continue using the flag for the republic, then the territory. The state of Hawaii continues to use the flag. On the right is part 1 of a series of 3 kapa moi that I am making. So kapa moi are sleeping kapa or blankets. In Hae Hawaii, I have removed the central coat of arms to create a kapa moe or blanket that speaks of the loss caused by the overthrow of the Hawaiian monarchy / government, and of the resulting historical trauma that has been passed down through generations. By using kapa, the fabric of Hawaii, traditionally used in every aspect of Hawaiian life in the past, I am highlighting the people's connection to Aina, land, lāhui, the nation and national pride, and the culture, connecting the past with the present. I also speak of resilience of our continued fight for the lāhui, using the Hae Hawaii as a way to remember history and our national identity while moving forward. Next slide, please. So these are images from the original Queen's quilt. And since Emily has spoken about the Queen's quilt, I would like to take a moment to say a little about the Queen and the overthrow. Dependent upon your sources, the Queen was either trying to strengthen her position and gain more power for herself, or was moving towards a constitutional monarchy, giving the people more say in government. When the Queen ascended the throne in 1891, women in the United States were not allowed to vote. The 19th Amendment, granting women the right to vote, was passed, then ratified on August 18, 1920. In 1886, 5 years before ascending the throne, Lili'u Okalani founded a bank in Honolulu for women. And later, she helped form the Hilo Savings Hui, where women could save and get microloans. Sadly, both did not last. At the same time, she was also helping to pay for orphans to go to school. In the 1800s in the United States, when a woman married, her property and legal existence transferred to her husband. In 1839, the Married Women's Property Act was passed in Mississippi. Women could now regain ownership of their property. While in Hawaii, the Queen had kept her monetary assets separate from her husband's accounts. Yes, the American businessmen felt that an overthrow was necessary in order to get tax breaks on their imports to the United States, increasing their profit margins. But they also realized that the Queen was pushing for a constitutional monarchy, giving both sexes a voice in government. With the overthrow of the Hawaiian monarchy, women's rights in Hawaii were now suppressed, adding to the cultural oppression that existed at the time. Next slide, please. Kapa moe, the Queen's quilt, part 2 of a series of 3. The kapa squares are inspired by the crazy quilt that Queen Liliuokalani and her companions began when she was imprisoned at Iolani Palace and completed after her release. There are 9 squares on the Queen's quilt, and 6 of the kapa moe are shown here. I have stripped the quilt of its color, text, and imagery by using undyed kapa, creating kapa pieces of dark and light by dry aging the stripped and unbeaten wauke prior to removing the sappy residue. This was done to give the kapa a sense of time passing and yet frozen, like trauma that happens and is there forever in our psyche, here referring to the overthrow of 1893 and the historical trauma that continued into the present. When King Kalakaua was serving in office as the elected king, he presented the Kumulipo, the creation story, as his genealogy and right to rule. In Hawaii, social and political power is dependent upon blood descent and the ability to prove one's status by tracing one's genealogy back in time. Sorry. Queen Liliuokalani translated Kumulipo from Hawaiian to English while she was imprisoned. As sister to the former king, this was also her genealogy, and further legitimized her right to rule, while connecting her to all Hawaiians and every living thing on earth, in addition to the Hawaiian gods. Kapa connects the traditional fabric and the history of Hawaii to the present. Watermarks of plants and creatures on land and in the sea that are mentioned in the Kumulipo are beaten into the kapa. The watermarks were then rubbed, beaten, or ironed out, leaving very small remnants here and there. This encourages a closer look at the piece of kapa. Beating in and erasing the imagery speaks of memory of what was and what is no longer visible, but still lingers. Next. Thank you. So I wanted to show you what watermarks are. So these are maka'upenapupu watermarks that are created by being beaten or impressed into the fabric. On the right, the two kapa on the right show the watermark, the maka'upenapupu. So in one translation, if you do it literally, it would mean the circles inside of the squares or the net. If you look at it from a more Hawaiian perspective, it would be the eyes of the fish caught in the net. So you can see the watermark visible with light behind it, and on the right, not as visible with no light. The pieces on the right are actually post-contact pieces, and the name of this kapa is pa'iula, the beaten thing. And you could see little red colors and black. And this was actually shredded fabric that was beaten onto the kapa while it was still wet. On the left, the two images, the one on the right on the left, so the lighter is the watermark showing through with the light. And the image on the left of that is the same kapa, but without the watermark showing. I believe that this is possibly pre-contact. It is dyed and it is oiled, possibly with kukui nut oil. Thank you, next. And I did not beat these. Okay, and so these are the beaters, some of the beaters. The three to the right are actually antiques, which is what I used to beat with. And I feel that it actually connects me to the work of my ancestors. And they were gifted to me several years ago. They were collected in the 1930s and gifted to me by a collector, Jack Ford. The one on the far left is a modern beater that was made specifically for me. The design is the mano, the shark, and you may be familiar somewhat with that imagery because of the occupation of Mauna Kea. And you can just see on that last beater, those fine grooves, which is what we used to beat. And these are final beaters. The image next to the mano, I do not know the name, but it looks like it is an amalgam of two different designs put together. The next to that, with the lines and the angles going up, is about the amau fern, the fern in the forest. The next one to that is the maka'upenapupu, similar to, is actually the same design that you saw on the kapas earlier. And I'm not sure if you can see, I can barely see a little X on the right, on the bottom, where I impressed the beater to try to get a little design, but it's very, very faint. So you may be able to see some lines. And so those are the finished beaters and what I would use to beat in my imagery and then erase. Next slide. Thank you. So with these pieces, I am actually looking at the future, and the future to part 3 of the series. And I am looking at these images, and not just these, of course, others, to inform the work that I will be doing. So on the left, you have a Kuʻu Hae Aloha and my beloved flag. And you'll see that so while the center coat of arms has been simplified, it is based on the 1883 coat of arms for Kalakaua coronation. But really what I want to focus on is the quilt on the right, the annexation quilt. So the embroidered annexation quilt is done in the red thread style of embroidery that was popular in Hawaii and elsewhere for a while. And in part, it was because the cotton thread was color fast and it was very cheap. So it was cheaper than silk threads or other things. So this was commonly used. It is called the annexation quilt because of the stylized American flag on the left side of the coat of arms. So if you look at any one of these coat of arms, you can see on the right side a Hawaiian flag, and on the left, a flag with a single star and stripes, which represents the American flag. And so the artist who created this, we suppose, was symbolizing unity with the new government. And this was created after the annexation of Hawaii. And while many of the Kuʻu Hae Aloha have leaves or branches on the bottom below the coat of arms, what's interesting about the annexation quilt is that you have what looks like ohia lehua. And the importance of ohia lehua is that it is one of the first, is one of the first colonizers on new land. So I do not think that that was chosen just because it was pretty. So, and with the addition of stars placed in the design, we can place this imagery after 1893, because this is the first time stars appear in the Hawaiian seal. So, so my intention is to create a quilt, and my working title at the moment is the Anti-Annexation Quilt. Thank you. I'm done. Oh, sorry, Jory, can I pass this on to you? I'm sorry.
No worries. Thank you so much, Bernice. Thanks to everyone for being here today. My name is Jory Minaya. I'm speaking to you from Brooklyn, New York City, which is part of the ancestral Lenape territory. I was born here. I grew up in the Dominican Republic, where my family is from. And then I came back here about 12 years ago to finish my undergrad and continue my art career. My work tries to navigate these various identities and questions an imagined tropical identity that I have found myself negotiating since moving to the States. And I try to, through my work, find agency in spite of the misconceptions and projections. I'm excited to be part of this conversation about textile and identity from maybe like a wild card point or place. A lot of my work has been interested in the way that tropical aesthetics have been watered down and used interchangeably across tropical spaces, and trying to appropriate this to reclaim agency from some subversions of this aesthetic. So I thought it would be cool to start my presentation with this image that I took at a gift shop in the Dominican Republic some years ago, with some fabrics that I have been collecting a little detail of which is shown here, which is like showing this aesthetic that I think is more related in people's imaginaries to the Pacific, yet this one is welcoming you to the Bahamas and Jamaica, and this series continues. So you have it in the Dominican Republic and Puerto Rico, etc. The same pattern. So we can move to the next slide. My series, I Can Wear Tropical Print Now, is looking into these matters, and it's a reflection of some of my early experiences as an immigrant in New York City. When I moved at age 21 for finishing my undergrad, I thrifted a lot, and I still do. And I went to school once wearing one of these thrifted shirts with one of these tropical patterns, and I found instances of like projection and like performativity related to this. To me, wearing this shirt, people's expressions, and I don't know, someone did like a shoulder shimmy situation that I still think about to this day. So years later, I revisited this anecdotes through this series, calling it I Can Wear Tropical Print Now. And the series is well, using shirts that I found on thrift stores and looking at patterns that I had been collecting, and combining them and reinserting gestures that would allow me to relate to the shirts. Again, trying to acknowledge the omissions and the things that are left out of the history of the Caribbean region, which shares a lot with the history of other tropical islands across the world that share this history of imperialism and colonialism. We can go to the next slide. So one of these shirts, number 3, is using this deserted island motif, which is a strategy and gesture that extends, well, that is repeated across some of this construction of tropical pattern, but also the deserted landscape is something that extends to other contexts, like landscape painting in the Westworld expansion, Manifest Destiny sort of moment in US history, where you had a lot of deserted, I'm sorry, I have a cold, deserted landscapes that are devoid of indigenous people as part of this imaginary of a place that it is not occupied, so we can occupy it now. So what I did with this one was insert in fabric, photo prints on fabric, sorry. Photo prints on fabric, showing images of yachts, US Navy boats, cruises, and galleons reoccupying this deserted landscape space. We can go to the next slide. Another photo in, not a photo, another shirt in this series is I Can Wear Tropical Print Now, number 1. Is the first one I made in the series. It's using this shirt that I found that had this empty space in the back. And I inserted this type of varsity font with the text Invaders 1965 Dominican Republic, which is the date of the second US invasion in the Dominican Republic that came about when the DR had, after a period when the DR had elected our first democratic president after the death of the dictator Trujillo. And the US considered that this president was leaning left, and it was during this whole Cold War period. So they wanted to have control over I guess, a political moment then. It's also my mom's birth year, so I relate a lot to this shirt. You can go to the next slide, please, Richard. This other shirt is using a shirt that I found and painting little T-pins that are nailing the pre-existing flowers depicted on the original design, nailing them down, and then there's little drips of blood coming out from them, thinking a lot of the violence of Western science and colonial and imperial histories, and how they study specimens, and which is language that one may think is limited to things like flora and fauna, which is already violent in and of itself, but of course also extends to humans a couple of centuries ago and in many forms still today. We can go to the next slide. And then I'll end with this shirt. I'm gonna take a few more minutes to talk about another series, but I'll end this series with this shirt called Opacity. I Can Wear Tropical Print #2. And I was thinking a lot of Edward Glissant's ideas of opacity in relation to agency and how one gets to define oneself and remain opaque, meaning not legible to a system that conflates legibility with control, which are ideas that are also interesting to me in relation to camouflage, which is something that I'm interested in across several of my works, this series included. And something that I found very curious about this particular shirt and how it interacts with the fabric behind, and this happens in other works in this series, is how the print that is in the fabric depicted behind is one type of production that is very contemporary. It's spandex. It's designed digitally in almost like a 2000s paint aesthetic, whereas the shirt is vintage and is more situated in a silk screen color separation production. And the way that they blend into each other and mimic each other and regurgitate each other, I think is also interesting in relation to how this aesthetic has been made interchangeable across many places as an extension of imperial and colonial histories and modes of seeing and ways of understanding different peoples. And then we can go to the next slide. Something that I have become very interested in is how a lot of these patterns still have a strong presence of botanical illustrations, which is an aesthetic that when you think about botanical illustrations as a resource, colonial resource for understanding and assessing knowledge that was later instrumentalized for exploitation, is ironic that this is still such a dominant aesthetic today in a way that we think is innocuous and yeah, we can go to the next slide. I'm so sorry, this flew. Okay, so this other series that I've been expanding in recent years is thinking about this idea of the botanical illustration and meditating on how a lot of the patterns that I have been looking at in previous years that I have been appropriating to create these works are basically repeating the same motifs. And if you list the number of plants that they have, it's like 10 or 15. The ones that you can identify, the ones that are not so generic that, you know, it's just like a generic palm and you cannot name it. But so I was curious about whether instead of thinking about these patterns through the motifs that are repeated regardless of location and history, I could find plants that I could use to create new motifs that instead represented specific history, specific places, and particularly coming from a place of resistance. So the pattern, the illustration that you're seeing here is of a plant called manchineel, which was used by the Calusa natives of South Florida in the 1500s to as a poison to poison the tip of their arrows for hunting. You can go to the next slide. And the way that I've been displaying these patterns most prominently is by intervening public monuments, usually of colonizers, usually of Christopher Columbus. But this one here is Ponce de Leon, who died in his second expedition to Florida in 1521 by a poisoned arrow with manchineel. So I use this plant to make the design to cover the statue and question the presence of these hideous things in public space, but also this history that they celebrate. And instead of highlighting that, choosing to highlight the stories of the people who resisted and survived these systems that the statues represent. And we can go to the next slide, and I'm going to wrap it up because it's been a couple minutes past my time. But this is the statue of Christopher Columbus in front of the first cathedral of the New World, which is in the Dominican Republic, Santo Domingo, my home city. And the plants that are depicted here might be too many to name, but maybe I can highlight tobacco, which is smoked in Taino and Afro-descending traditions, religious traditions, to communicate with ancestors, which to me points to a manner of resistance of imposed Christianity. Some other plants were used more in forms of resistance that are more physical and more practical, but I was also interested in many forms of resistance. And then this statue of Christopher Columbus, you can go to the final slide, which is the next one. I didn't really get a permit for, so this was done a little more guerrilla style by waking up at 5 a.m. and covering the thing anyways. In spite of waiting for town hall to get any answers to me for like months and months and months. We kind of just did this. We dressed up as, I don't know, official workers to try to deter any authorities that could see us and I guess confuse them for a minute. Eventually the installation was taken down a few hours later, but it survived long enough for it to be photographed and circulated in media and seen by many eyes. Thank you so much.
Mahalo, Emily, mahalo, Bernice, mahalo, Jody, for sharing about your work openly with everyone. I know that we're running a little over time, but Jody, I think that was the perfect piece to end on, or to end the individual presentations on, sort of leaving us with that taste of breaking the law in our mouths. Related to that, to the questions of affirmation and resistance, I was wondering if the three of you could comment a bit more on the importance of these things, of affirmation and resistance in your practices as scholars and artists. Why is an approach like that something that we should be considering today or not? And then maybe we can see where the conversation goes from there. We're at around 1 o'clock, so I think we have about 25 minutes. Anyone want to get us started? Affirmation and resistance in your practices? what you affirm, what you resist?
I can quickly say that those two words are important to me, and how I try to navigate how to deal with this whole colonial project and the remnants of that. So I think that part of that has been, I don't know, homogenization and interchangeability, and then affirmation for me has to do with remembering where one comes from, remembering agency, and trying to make ways through which these stories can be highlighted and continue surviving. And then resistance, similarly, I guess, to all of that has been imposed. And I'll think a little more while someone else talks, but those are my initial thoughts.
Thank you. Bernice, Emily, you want to comment on the relationship between affirmation and resistance in your work, or in what you shared today with the group?
Sure. I think affirmation and resistance are, again, something that I think about a lot, especially being embedded within academia, this whole structure that is very much coming out of a colonial system and way of thinking. And I think even just policing thought, policing bodies, the kind of knowledge that's legible versus what's camouflaged. And so, I think that it takes a certain kind of labor on many different planes to sort of be cognizant of that, doing the kind of work that I do. But then I also see things like when I'm in the classroom teaching, and I have the wonderful opportunity to teach a survey of Pacific Islands visual culture, just the conversations that I was able to have with my students by bringing in these different perspectives, trying to connect them to Native Pacific Island scholars and artists, that was really affirming that there is potentially a way to kind of navigate that space, both in teaching and in scholarship, but it's a tricky balance.
So affirmation and resistance. I think when I look at my, from looking at my artwork, I think it's interesting because when I started, I never thought that this is the path that I would be taking. But what's happened is that when I look at the past, when I look at historical work, and I start and I connect, and it's on a very different plane and level that I connect with the work and with the past. And it's interesting because it's not something that I necessarily would have thought about maybe a year or, well, actually more than that, maybe 5 years ago. But it seems that the more I do, the more that comes. So, and I think that those are affirmations that, and I think it's more of a native way of thinking, that the idea that you open the door and everything comes, but then of course you have to filter. And it's like the beaters that I was gifted. And I was gifted these beaters because this gentleman that I had met when I was a exchange student years ago in Oakland knew I was from Hawaii, and we sort of kept in touch, and I started working with students, and he saw what I was doing. And so I was gifted all of these antique beaters. And initially I didn't feel like I could use them, that I was not at the point where I could honor the tools. But he called me and he said, you are good, but you will get even better because now you're connecting with your ancestors. And I think that that is the affirmation that I would acknowledge rather than, making art and having this, sometimes these other connections. And, Drew, I mean, you of all people probably know that a lot of my work gets gifted away. And so, and I think that, and that's one of the affirmations when people, for me, that are willing to, I say, this is what I want to do, and they all want to help. And they are all there supporting me. And that's all the affirmations I need. And I know you're probably wanting to know something else, but, and when it comes to resistance, I think personally, I don't have a choice. That if I see something that I feel is wrong, then I have to stand up, unfortunately. And I say unfortunately, because a lot of times it's difficult. And a lot of times you are the only one standing up at that moment. And it's not until people realize what you're doing and what you're saying and have time to process it that you start getting support. And so, Jory, I love your gorilla installation. That's the kind of stuff I like to do.
Thank you.
It was wonderful. I loved it. But yeah, so I don't know, Drew, if I answered your question, but.
Oh, absolutely. Thank you all for sharing what you did in response to that question. If anyone from the audience has questions that you want to type into the chat now, we'll get to those in a little bit. I have a couple more questions, but I also wanted to give you folks a chance to ask each other questions if you have had specific thoughts during the presentation that you wanted to hear more about from one another.
I had a quick question for Bernice. You mentioned a plant name in the annexation quilt. I think it's a plant name, Hae Aloha.
Oh, right.
What,
Metrosideros.
What is that?
Metrosideros polymorpha.
Okay. Yeah, I thought that was interesting that you mentioned that it was, the first colonizer in
Right,
in
yeah.
your land. Yeah, thank you.
You're welcome.
I guess I had a question for both of you about working with fabric or thinking about art, like with these materials. Is there something that you find really kind of effective about that? I guess, because I've been thinking a lot about quilts and how, they sometimes get pieced together by objects that are personal. You use cloth and you wear it against your skin. You sleep beneath it. So and it can even kind of hold memories, I think, too, of like family, like when with your Invaders shirt, Joyity. So I was wondering if there's something about cloth in particular that you find powerful to work with.
I think for me, my mom has a clothing store, so maybe it goes back to that. I don't know, upbringing and being surrounded by fabric and seeing people buying pieces and relating to them in a very dearly way, or having memories, like you said, related to specific pieces of clothes. But at the same time, I think a lot of it is so intertwined with this system of, globalized consumerism that I also don't want to romanticize it too much. And something that I've been thinking about in my work, well, a lot of it has to do with appropriation, and in that way kind of reusing what's existing. With the cloaking of the colonizer statues, I guess I've been a little more fragmented in how I feel about it, because those are produced and printed for that. And then I'm also trying to think about sustainability a little more presently, and like, I don't know what the future of this series is, but I'm a little kind of in the middle with that. But I think it's a beautiful material in how it's I don't know, especially in an art world that I navigate that is very formal, that likes to hang things on the wall that are like rectangled and controlled. I think fabric has this kind of amorphous or potentially amorphous quality, and it's soft, and it's doing all these things that other materials don't do. Some people have described some of my cloaking of colonizer statues as queering, this like male phallic thing in public space, and I like that metaphor also, and I think that you wouldn't get that without the material. Yeah.
So, Emily, I don't always use fabric in my work. Actually, I chose to do this for this series because, well, although, I mean, I do use paper, but I use whatever material I think speaks to the piece that I'm working on at that time. But I think kapa is interesting because in the 70s, you'll hear that you had this cultural awakening in Hawaii, where the language and music and of course the fabric starts reappearing, and people are now becoming interested in really connecting with their cultural past and their history and creating this continuity. And there actually were still probably a couple of people who knew how to create these objects. But kapa making actually almost dies out, and everyone has to relearn. And I think that's one of the important things about using this material, is that we are learning and we are continuing this tradition. And in 2010, I believe, I was part of a project where we made kapa. And this was the first time that the kapa was actually worn in a public hula performance in over 100 years. And they ended up making a video about it, Kahana Kapa. But one of the importance about this project was 25 kapa makers were invited, maybe 30. So they tried to invite as many as they could. So maybe 30 were invited, but 23 finished. 2 years later, they redid the project in Maui, and they were able to find 50 makers. So by doing this, a movement has started, and the kapa community is growing tremendously, and I think that's exciting and that's important. So thank you for asking.
Even if we just look in the past few years at contemporary kapa practices, now we have folks that are out of Aotearoa that have learned from Hawaiian teachers. There are folks in the Pacific Northwest of the continental US that have learned from teachers here in Hawaii. And to think, Bernice, about what you shared, sort of where it's been and where it is now, is very uplifting for me. And I'm a pretty cynical person in general. So thanks for sharing that.
You're welcome.
Mathilde has appeared.
Yes, hi.
Hi.
Thank you to the four of you for this wonderful presentation. We have so many great comments. Everyone really enjoy seeing the works and really found the images you showed tonight really powerful. So thank you for that. I think it was amazing to see all these textiles through your eyes and through your researches. And I think it was really a strong perspective on the show and on the flag quilt that is currently in the exhibition, what that quilt knows about me. I would love to end. We have some questions, so I'm going to get to some of them. But before, Richard, would you mind sharing again the PowerPoint, because there is an image that Bernice shared with us, and that's the last image of the PowerPoint, and as juxtaposed it to Mari Borkowski's quilt, which is not on view, but it's part of our collection. It's a Hawaiian style quilt. It's another one, two more, Richard. Another one. next, yeah, this one. So on the left is Bernice, who sent us and shared with us this image. And so when I started to do some research for this program, I read everywhere that there were two styles, like the Hawaiian quilt style and then the flag quilt style. And I wanted to program something that made connection. And I think tonight you made so many connections between these two styles, but this juxtaposition trigger also more connection. And I would love for you, Bernice, maybe to talk a little bit more about the quilt on the left and what does this juxtaposition of these two quilts trigger for you, and maybe you all also, if you can add some thoughts on this.
I mean, so I am I don't feel like I'm an authority on the quilts, but I will say about these quilts. When you showed the one on the right, I instantly thought of the one on the left, which was actually created sort of as a memorial to Princess Ka'iolani, who passed away at a very young age. Well, I believe she was 20 when she passes away. But I think it was the provisional government, and not just the provisional government, but the Hawaiians were also thinking of her as the hope for the monarchy to continue, because she was younger and because there weren't very many other choices, I don't believe, at the time. But it's interesting because the two quilts are very similar. And I think Mary is honoring the one on the left. But so if we read the quilt on the left, you'll see that there are initially, so there are the combs, which are the 8 center, well, not quite center, the 8 fan looking things going around. So those would have been the princess's combs. Right above that are crowns. So those are crown symbols. And then you have 8-sided stars, 8 pointed stars above the combs, so between the others. And then the leaf lays going on top of the crown. And you have those stars. So of course the stars do not appear until after the overthrow. So so that's how I would read that. The one on the right, I mean, I like it because it's a little more simple. So in its simplicity, as opposed to the one next to it, which obviously the space is filled. And I think everyone could jump in here because you can definitely see a difference between the one that was made in Hawaii versus the other. I think it's from your collection, right?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes, it's an American artist.
Ah, okay. Yeah. So I don't know, Drew, would you have anything to say about the one on the right versus the one on the left?
Whenever I see dolphins, I always smile. And that smile comes from a place of affirmation and resistance. Those motifs for me make me think of this quilt in a certain kind of way, a very different way than I would think about the one on its left, which the pattern it may be referencing. More of sort of as not a postcard, but maybe a reminder or similar to a knickknack or novelty item that someone might purchase while on vacation to remind them of their blissful beachside sunsets. I sort of understand the quilt on the right in a similar way. It's a reminder of an experience, of a visit perhaps, and maybe brings the artist or whoever it was given to a certain kind of comfort because of those associations they have with Hawaii. But that's just my read, not knowing anything about it.
And Jory, would you like to add something? And maybe Emily?
Well, I'm more interested in hearing what Drew and Bernice had to say, because not being from Hawaii, I'm not familiar with a lot of these traditions, and what Drew was saying, I thought was interesting because, of course, I'm interested in that type of like souvenir logic and how it like replaces things and makes things more quote unquote accessible, at the same time that it dilutes them and homogenizes it. The way that it makes things accessible is by like tapping into some collective imaginarium of that is supposedly shared, but I question whether that is so shared as the idea of it wants to think about itself. I don't know if I'm making much sense, but
Yeah, totally.
Similar to the way that leahi or diamond head, the silhouette appears on one of the aloha shirts that you shared during your presentation. But even though the place that is identified is halfway around the world.
Right.
And sorry, the princess died when she was 24. But, I'm looking at the one on the right, which I was thinking about the flowers and the dolphins and the fish. And I just thought that perhaps, and besides tourists, but also something you would see maybe in a child's room, that these friendlier images that would make you smile as a child. And so I was just curious. In 1979, is Mary still alive? She's still alive.
This artist is not alive anymore, but she
I was thinking to ask her.
Yeah, but she made this piece for a sister, I believe, and who loved the island and visited the island many times. So it's definitely a place like Hawaii is a place of paradise or remembrance and pleasure for sure. Very different work from the thread painting that this artist has been doing. But yeah, I just I love the connection between the first one was very political to the second one was more an Hawaiian style. So I thought that was for me a way to reconcile the difficulty I had to understand how to connect two styles. So I would like to thank you all because I think you did such a wonderful job navigating us through the complexities of the Hawaiian textiles and how they distill through the world. So that was really, really wonderful. There's so many other questions. Maybe Emily, because we didn't hear so much from you for this on this slide. Would you like to say a little bit more about the materials of the crazy quilt? Because a lot of people had questions for the chat, and then we will end probably on that. If you can just share about how the quilt was made. I think there's a question about was it handmade and also how the patchwork were sewn together and the material. So if you can share a little bit more about that.
Yeah, and I will preface this by saying you invited a photo historian to a fiber arts party, so I'm going to do my best. Yeah, my understanding is that the patchwork pieces themselves were hand stitched. One thing I was kind of thinking about why work in that particular style, I think, could also have to do with the conditions of Liliuokalani's imprisonment. So it's easier to work with a lot of different people in that style. My understanding of whether sewing machines were used at that time is that in the 1880s and 90s, they do become more prevalent in quilting, but that for this quilt, the Queen's quilt in particular, that if they were used, it was probably only to attach the top panels to the backing of the quilt itself. And then I think there is maybe an interesting connection between the two quilts we're looking at on the screen and the Queen's quilt in terms of I think for the one on the left, if you look at those kind of leafy reefs that come out of the crown motif, I've heard from certain scholars and also from my advisor, Stacy Kamahiro, that those are probably Maile reefs and that there's actually a lot of plant symbolism within Hawaiian quilts that directly relates to the monarchy and also to plants that would be used in lei making. And so I think if you think about that that also brings us into this interesting space of what does somebody who is maybe Kanaka Maoli or has been able to spend a significant amount of time on the land in Hawaii and has community connections there understand from those symbols versus kind of the popular sort of understanding of lei, you know, like people want to throw like backyard luau's or, you know, go to the party store and buy a plastic lei. So yeah, I think that there's a lot going on with these images. And I think that it's also interesting that you can take a look at a quilt from the 19th century, the 20th century, you know, and the relevancy changes, but it's still there, it's still potent, it's still something that we're talking about and can think about, and I think can be effective as a form of resistance and affirmation.
Would you like to add anything? Shall I close this conversation?
Well, I just want to thank everyone for being here and for sharing openly. Appreciate the invitation, Mathilde. It's great to be in conversation with you three, Emily, Bernice, and Jody. Thanks so much.
No, thank you.
Thank
So,
you.
yeah, I wanted to say thank you also. And Drew, I thought I was the wild card.
We're all the wild cards.
Yeah.
Yes, exactly.